Hello, everybody. Welcome to
Monday with the Mavens.
Today, we're talking about
How to lose friends and poison your body.
and the flip side of that,
Yeah.
actually. The lose friends part is just that we hope we don't lose you as a friend because we're going to be slinging some facts today. But honestly, they're things we all need to know, and then we can make our own educated decisions.
Yeah. I guess with that, we'll just dive right in. So, like we said, we don't want to lose you guys as friends. However, we may be talking about some things that might be a little bit hard to hear and could be potentially a little bit controversial.
And
some people.
I'll say, do your own research. Do your own reading. Look at the studies. We actually did a deep dive into several current studies. What's so interesting, I just heard this fact, and it's sad, and I've worked in healthcare for a long time. I've worked with amazing healthcare providers. However, they say, on average, it takes 17 years, you guys, for new research and information to become common practice in traditional healthcare. So, oh my goodness, and there's constantly, with our technology and ability to really research, which research in itself is a whole nother subject that I have some problems with. But I mean, just to put it out there, but it's crazy, and there's so much good information out there, oftentimes contradicting information, and I think that's why it's really important for people to do their own research, dig in, look at the facts. But the bottom line is there are some things, there's actually a lot of things, but we're going to focus on 3 of them today, that if we could all be more aware, more educated, and start to slowly shift away from and or find things to replace, we will be healthier, happier, longer living humans.
And I think the key to that is what Emmy said, is awareness. Just being aware is step 1.
Yeah.
And so what we want to do today is we want you guys to become aware of a few things that we have learned, and some things that we're still working on.
Sorry. we're changed our setting today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. And I will just say, all the information that we're going to present today, you guys, it's just that, it's information. We are coming with no judgment. We're not saying this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. We're all adults. We can make our own decisions. We can be equipped with information. And quite frankly, there are times that Haley and I will still consume some of what we talked about today, even though we very much know that it is harming us.
Yeah.
And, I think it's good. Also, if you guys have questions, if you, have anything specific, because some of this is okay, well, wait a second, does that fit in that category? I think that we'll do some storytelling today, and we'll jump into some facts and some specific research. But if there's anything that you want to add to the discussion, if there's unrelated questions, absolutely, please feel free to use the comment box. As usual, we are looking at 2 screens. We have Instagram over here, Facebook over here. So if we break eye contact for a little bit and it's awkward, I'm sorry.
It's like a tennis match for me. I never know which one to look at. I'm over here.
Yeah. So anyways, thank you guys so much for joining us. We are going to start with talking about seed oils.
Yeah.
My goodness. I think all 3 things that we're going to talk about today, and we've touched a lot in the past on the role of inflammatory foods versus non-inflammatory foods. And in a nutshell, when we usually talk about inflammatory foods, we're talking about grains, we're talking about dairy, we're talking about sugar. Today, we're going to really kind of dive a little bit further, and seed oils being a big one, because seed oils are literally killing our population.
Yeah.
They are a catalyst to disease, and we don't have to consume them. It's actually, it doesn't have to be that difficult to eliminate seed oils, especially because there's some real tasty alternatives.
Yeah, and I think that we need to go back a little bit further too and talk about a little bit of the history of seed oils, where they came from, when we started using them, why we started using them, and kind of get into that a little bit. So a little bit of a story time, just a little bit. And I made some notes today because I wanted to, they're actually old notes that I haven't looked at recently, but I do want you guys to know a little bit about the history. And so in the late 1800s, that's way back, only not so far back that we can't, you know, dig up that history. But in the late 1870s, there were these 2 guys. Well, first of all, here in America, but it was before the Industrial Revolution and before we had really industrialized oils, right? And so we were using cottonseed oils and different things like that for different purposes. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, cottonseed oil was a normal part of everyday living. People use it as fuel to light their candle or to light their lanterns, and different things like that. And there were these two guys, you guys might recognize their names, Procter and Gamble. It's like William Procter and somebody Gamble. Very big names now. That's a giant corporation. Yeah. They thought, you know what? We can use this cottonseed oil as a product in our soaps. So they created a whole new product of soaps using cottonseed oil. And so I just want to make sure that or using the, well, we call it vegetable oil because it's easier to swallow.
Yeah. And I don't want to stop your story time. Here in a minute, we'll go through like the top 8 seed oils, so you can actually identify them.
So we're talking about cottonseed oil because that was the most prevalent at this time. And so they, like I said, they were using it as a fuel source, and it was readily available everywhere. It was also considered toxic waste at this time, and nobody in their right mind would ever think of consuming this oil, like ever. They used it to burn their lanterns and like lights at night, like it was fuel. Yeah. And so these guys, Procter and Gamble, very smart men who were very entrepreneurial, saw that they could take this toxic waste that was being used and they could formulate it into a soap, like I mentioned. So what they did is they chemically changed it a bit to make it a solid. They took it from a liquid form to a solid form, and then they were able to package it as soap. So what they did, and the way they did that is through hydrogenation, which everybody has heard of hydrogenated oils. And hopefully you guys know that like we typically should not consume hydrogenated oils.
And we're going to get into why that is, like what's actually happening in your body when when you do.
So when they took this cottonseed oil and they hydrogenated it, they made it a solid. It's what we call today is Crisco, or it's a solid oil, vegetable oil. I grew up, my grandma and my mom, like that's what we made big fluffy cookies with.
Biscuits, all the things.
Yeah, all the things. Yeah. And you can
Pie
you can buy it today on the counter as Crisco, and nobody thinks any different of it.
In the States you can, in a lot of other countries you cannot.
Yeah, because it's toxic to the human body.
It's poison.
Yeah, it's poison. And it is a seed oil, and we often don't think of it as a seed oil because it is labeled as vegetable oil because, like I said earlier, it's easier to swallow if we think we're, consuming vegetable oils, even though technically it's not a vegetable oil. It is a seed oil.
And so when we talk about seed oils today, am I cutting you off?
No.
Or you, okay. Is history...
Well, and it goes in a little bit deeper in the 1930s, 1950s, the start of the Industrial Revolution. Government started subsidizing farms and giving money to farmers to grow these big crops that would yield huge yields of produce, right? So soy, cotton, rapeseed was one, safflower, and they would produce oils, and then, those products would get fed to their animals, and then the oils that would be pulled from those grains would then be put into our food.
And at the time, they actually thought they were doing a service to citizens in that, thinking that it was heart healthy.
Yep.
And, as time goes on, we start learning more and more. And now
so that's another thing. So,
yes.
You guys, we all get duped,
Yeah.
So Procter & Gamble... And you can all look this up. Procter & Gamble actually gave, I can't remember what the monetary amount was. It was like $1.5 million at the time in like the early 1930s.
Which was a lot.
To the Heart Association. I can't remember what it's called, the H whatever. To
the American Heart Association?
Yeah. The AMA. Whatever. Anyways, they gave a bunch of money to the American Heart Association in order to help push heart healthy oils. So whether it was intentional that they knew that it wasn't good or bad, none of that is here nor there. All I'm saying is that oftentimes if you follow the money, you can kind of see the heart of something. And so a lot of money was pumped into the American Heart Association to push these oils as being heart healthy. And then the science changes. We learn later on that, like, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be putting those oils in our bodies. And especially because by the time they go from being processed, which is a whole deal of like, if you knew like how these things were processed, you'd be like, I'm not putting that in my body. But from the point of them being harvested, processed, and then put on the shelf, most of those vegetable oils are already rancid. So
they're rancid, and they are going to change and negatively affect your cellular structure and create inflammation in your body, which leads to disease.
Yeah.
And so backing up for just a minute, I want to touch on like what what are the primary seed oils, vegetable oils that we're consuming, especially here in the States, that are in almost every packaged food, even in a lot of what we would consider healthier foods. If you look at the label, there are seed oils in almost everything.
Yeah.
And so I just wrote down a little list so I didn't miss any: canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, grapeseed oil, rice bran oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, and sunflower oil are the top 8. And so you can look at a label, and what's really interesting is Haley talked about how Procter & Gamble paid the American Heart Association basically to promote these as heart healthy, when they are likely one of the top causes, if not the top cause, of heart disease today in America. And
that's why we're losing friends, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, it's criminal.
It is.
And I know that it takes a long time for research and science to catch up, but the fact that especially our kids are, most of the packaged goods, most of the things that are being served, most things that are considered convenient, most things that are cooked in a restaurant, because
in oil, French
seed
fries.
oil is less expensive than things like avocado oil, than things like olive oil, and then things like coconut oil. They are less expensive. And so even somewhere like Chipotle, they use rice bran oil, and a lot of people think that it's healthy, but like the oils that they use, you know, they even promote it as a healthier alternative. It still translates to linoleic acid, which is it's the omega-6 that's doing damage cellularly to us, to our metabolisms, and to the levels of inflammation in our body, which ultimately, and I'm talking about chronic inflammation, not acute inflammation, that is what ultimately leads to the majority of disease.
Yeah.
And so it's criminal.
So don't confuse omega-6s with omega-3s.
Yeah.
Omega-3s are the good fatty acids that we do want. And we will naturally get omega-6s through various things that we eat. However, the proportion of omega-6s against omega-3s, there's a very, you have to have a nice balanced ratio of those. And what happens when we eat packaged foods, when we eat foods that are fried, typically at fast food or any mainstream restaurant, really, those foods contain seed oils, which then really jack up the omega-6s, and it throws that ratio off, and then our body doesn't know what to do with it, and it really turns into a toxic inflammatory response within our bodies, and we don't want that. So it is not against the law for you to go to Chipotle, Chick-fil-A, wherever you like to eat, and ask, what kind of oil do you cook your food in? And if it's one that you're like, I don't really want to consume that, then go somewhere else. No big deal.
Yeah, and once again, we're not saying we're never going to consume some of the things that we're talking about today, but just being equipped with the information and the knowledge and starting to make more mindful decisions on some of the things that we're eating, and especially what we're using in our own homes to cook with, can make such a big difference over time. I mean, such a big difference over time. And we'll go into the alternatives here in a minute, some of which we already mentioned. But what happens when you're consuming these oils, so just to kind of break it down, the large majority of restaurants, of packaged food, and even oftentimes what's cooked in our homes, if you're using one of the seed oils that we talked about, vegetable oils, what are known as vegetable oils, then that is oftentimes standard seed oils are 75% linoleic acid, which then converts to another acid in our body, which is what's actually creating the chronic inflammation, which is basically inflammation at a cellular level that, if not dealt with, will lead to things like obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, a lot of the primary illnesses that lead to death.
And long term, it's it's brain issues also, dementia, early onset Alzheimer's, all of those are all related to inflammation in the body. So I think that a general rule of thumb, inflammation in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's our body's automatic immune response to something negative that's happening inside of our bodies. We want that inflammation response to help rid our bodies of what it is. But what happens is when we have a continuous inflamed state inside our body just starts shutting down. It doesn't know what to do with constant inflammation. And so if we don't deal with it, then that's when the problems start happening, and it can happen, especially I think back to what I didn't know when my kids were really small, you know? And I mean, we just aren't fast food eaters in general, but like there's oftentimes like crackers and different things in your cupboard. If you go to your cupboard and you look and you read through the ingredients of, I don't even know.
Really,
crackers,
anything packaged.
of cereal.
Even if you buy it from like a higher end health food store. Like it's not, you know, there are some brands now that are really starting to promote like not containing seed oils, which is fantastic. They're going to be a little bit more expensive, but honestly,
save you money in the long run.
It really will. And I was reading that, I think, in fact, I might have wrote this down. Yeah, there's been a 20 times greater increase in the past 100 to 120 years of consumption of seed oils, which is where so much of our modern day disease comes from. Like, which is wild. And Haley told the story as to what led to that. And oftentimes today, the average American, 20% of their caloric intake are seed oils. 20%, you guys.
That's a lot.
Because they add up really quick.
Fast, yeah.
Healthy fats add up quick too,
Yeah.
but these can be replaced. And if you're looking at it from a laboratory standpoint, like if you're interested and you're working with a healthcare provider, 2 tests that I think are really great to be able to really look at over time, especially as you start eliminating or replacing some of these things. One is an HSCRP, which is a high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which really measures your inflammatory markers in your body. And if your provider is not ordering an HSCRP or they don't think it's necessary, you might want to find a new medical provider.
Or just ask. You can ask them, say, hey, can you please order this for me?
But if they don't think it's necessary, you might want to find a new healthcare provider.
You might. Yeah.
I'm just going to dish it out straight. Be your own advocate.
Be your own advocate.
Sure.
If they don't offer it, say, hey, I'd like to have this, and to educate your doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that I think we should always be looking at is and once again, talk to your doctor. Like, we are not trying to take the place of your medical provider, but I think a fasting glucose is a really important laboratory marker to be utilizing.
And it's like $35.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't cost very much to get that.
Ooh.
I may have done a little research.
And so anyways, I equip yourself, like, know your own body, know what's going on, and then start to, one, do your own reading, look at what you're eating. It was years ago, I remember buying some nuts, like just what I thought were just like plain salted nuts. And I offered some to my friend, and he just looked at the label. He's like, no, thank you. And I was like, they're just nuts. And he's like, they have safflower oil. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, just on nuts. Like, they have safflower oil. And, you know, he, even before I was super big on like really looking at seed oils, like, it was just a black and white thing for him. Like, I'm not gonna poison my body. And so I still go out, eat things. I'm sure I get seed oils that I consume from time to time, but I'd like to believe that just a simple act of awareness and trying to replace where I can and not utilizing them in my own home is going to pay dividends in my longevity and my family's longevity.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how do we make the switch at home. Yeah. So first things first, you have to know what you have in your house. Yeah. If you have vegetable oil, we're outside and there's a little bug flying around. If you have vegetable oil in your house, it'll be labeled vegetable oil. It could be labeled canola. It could be, cottonseed oil, whatever it is. Grapeseed, safflower oil. I feel like a lot of those aren't necessarily purchased like in bottle form in our house as much as like canola oil or even like a sesame oil is a seed oil also. But those are the ones that I think. Canola is probably the number one that people might have, or just like a generic vegetable oil. First things first, just get rid of them. There's no reason to have those because there are so many great alternatives. If you do eat animal products, replace it with like a grass-fed butter or a ghee. Or if you want it like a solid form, like what is it called? Like a solid animal fat? Tallow. I always want to call it taro, but that's like ant poison. Tallow.
In fact, after this, I have a little slide we can put in our stories that's like, use this instead of that, if you can.
Yeah.
And then,
or like just like olive oil, like so easy. You can get like extra virgin olive oil in a spray, or avocado oil, or coconut oil. My coconut oil. But yeah, it's just an easy replacement. And honestly, like, I didn't even notice a difference once I replaced any of vegetable oil with any of those other ones. In fact, if you use butter, it tastes better.
I actually far prefer the taste, and it might just be in my head. Like, when I bite into something that's like delicious and it has like a healthy fat in it, I'm like, ooh, I love me some healthy fat.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know that canola, so this is another thing, like canola oil tends to have a really high heat tolerance
Yeah.
because of the way it's been processed. So you can cook it at really high heat, which is why a lot of restaurants use it over and over in their like deep fryers because you don't have to replace it quite as often. But coconut oil also has a pretty high heat tolerance.
Yeah.
So
And I will say, especially for those of you guys just joining us, so today we're talking about like what are 3 simple things that we can do, that we can be aware of, that we can start shifting away from, that can really change the trajectory of our health and our family's health. I will say though, like as nutrition and macro coaches, we want our clients to be able to consume the things that they enjoy because that is what's going to lead to sustainability. And so our game is not a game about deprivation. It really isn't. Like we really want to work with our clients to be able to appropriately fuel their body and their brain and use strategy over a period of time to be able to slowly increase that caloric intake and have the metabolism really respond in the process. We have a lot of clients that there are certain things that are just deal breakers for them. Like they're important to have. You can fit in almost anything and you can still have success if you're consistent and you're hitting your numbers.
yeah.
We just would not be doing our due diligence if we didn't also educate about some of the small tweaks that you can make along the way of things that you can start to minimize, eliminate, replace that really leads to overall health. And even though a lot of our clients come for the aesthetic changes, which they will get, especially with consistency, it's all the other things that start coming because of that slow education and habit forming that happens along the way, like increased energy, improved sleep, better natural hormone balance. Like it's awesome. And
Yeah.
honestly, like we're talking about food and how we can slowly poison ourselves with some of these things like the seed oils that we just talked about. But there's so many more foods that are honestly like medicine. And so we don't want to be about the deprivation game. We want you fueling your body. We want you eating enough food. We want your brain to be working. We want your emotions to be stable. We want your hormones to be in harmony. And I think that some of those small educational pieces along the way that sometimes I think people are afraid to speak out on because they're like, oh, I'll lose friends or followers or whatever. And we're like, here's the facts. Here's the research. Do your own research. See what resonates with you. But if we can replace something with something as equally as delicious, if not more, that's actually helping us reach our goals and that's actually giving us nutrients and also satiating us, like why wouldn't we?
Totally. So yeah, we want you guys to like take little nuggets. And so if you're like, these girls are full of it, so be it. Like we said in the beginning, we may lose friends, but that's okay. But we wouldn't be doing our due diligence if we didn't tell you the things that we tell our clients. And so I'll tell you a little mini story. I had a client who had hit a plateau. She had amazing success like through her reverse cut, and we were climbing her back up, and she just hit a plateau. She could not lose any more weight. She was really struggling. And so I went in, I looked at her food diary and just looked at what she was eating, and we made some tweaks. We eliminated some inflammatory foods, seed oils being one of those, and then some grains. And then all of a sudden, boom, her body responded, and she started crushing her goals again. And so it was just...
And we didn't take away calories. In fact, we gave her more calories.
Yeah, and so it's like sometimes if you feel like you're spinning your wheels and nothing is changing, like you just need to like break it down into smaller pieces and say like, oh, it maybe someday, maybe in a year or so, you'll remember back and you'll be like, oh, I remember those 2 weird girls on the internet talking about seed oils, and I never did get rid of my canola oil, and we use it all the time, but I'm really struggling.
Yeah.
The good news for you is once you eliminate those things, our bodies are so sophisticated that it will start healing itself. And as you start giving yourself foods that fuel you and that are nutritious and that are good for you, your body will thank you for it, and you'll start feeling so much better. So anyway, we take the nugget.
It's so powerful,
and use it.
you guys. Like it's so powerful. And if there's one thing, like we're gonna talk about 3 today, but we just talked about seed oils, and I mean, I think that you'll be really surprised when you start looking at labels, especially of what are considered healthier foods. Like they are everywhere because the industry makes money off of them.
Yep.
And it's a broken system. So
It is.
man, it's wild. And I will say too, before we jump into the next one, you know, we talked about this in our client Zoom this morning, but we have a lot of clients who are super responsive and they just do fantastic right out of the gate. we also have some clients that come to us with, fairly far along in a disease state or have several comorbidities that are typically tied to that. And sometimes, if that's the case, it can take a little bit longer to get the metabolism to really respond. And sometimes it does require a little bit more specificity and truly trying to bring that level of inflammation down, which can be done so powerfully through food. And it doesn't mean you have to restrict yourself.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't. Like, we don't want people living in long-term restriction, because that does not lend well to sustainability or to really good health. Like, it just doesn't.
It doesn't. Nope.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go into the next one.
Number 2.
And we have a little story to tell, because we could appear a little hypocritical today.
There may be some people who watch this later or are watching it now and are like, these girls are full of it.
Yeah.
But we will tell you.
Yeah.
We'll tell you the story.
Well, we'll tell you. So last night, I was Haley's date because her husband's out of town, and we were at a fundraising auction out at Red Lily. If you guys live local, it's this beautiful vineyard. Anyways, some of the auction items were desserts. And I will say, like, I fit dessert in. I love dessert. I love chocolate. Oftentimes, I try to have them be made with more wholesome ingredients, but they're still high glycemic. Whatever. I'll fit things in. Well, we really wanted these little, like, harvest, what were they?
They're like pear, apple, bundt cakes.
And it was for a good cause. And we just wanted to share
raising
one.
money for my kids' school.
Yeah, and so anyways, we bid, and we really bid. We were determined to get these. So we got them.
Because we always win.
We were
kind.
supporting a good cause.
Yeah.
So anyways, we take them around because we're like, oh, well,
We're sharing.
we just wanted one to share. So we take them around, and we had several clients there that, first of all, we love getting to meet clients in
real life.
Yeah, because a lot of our clients are outside of this geographical area, but we have a lot here in the area. And so I would go to a table, and I don't know, maybe you're watching, but I go to a table, and I'm like, would you guys like a tart? No, not a tart. A bundt cake.
A bundt cake.
A little
mini
bundt cake.
spice bundt cake.
Yeah. And she's like, I'm one of your guys' clients, and I can't have that. And I was like, oh! I'm so sorry. Not that she couldn't have it, because our clients absolutely can have things like that, but we want them to be prepared and have tracked it, because for a season, we want our clients to track with specificity so we can really get that metabolic response. But I will say, we can have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
You just have to plan a little bit for it,
Totally.
and you have to fit it in, because we want the metabolism to know what's coming and going, and that's part of that process of really retraining the metabolism. But anyways,
if you were at the event last night and we were trying to push you to eat some dessert, just know that, like, it's okay every once in a while. And
well, we knew we were going to talk about sugar today, and so we're like, oh my gosh, of course, last night we're like...
Yeah, so sorry if you were at the South Medford High School booster fundraiser and we were pushing you to eat bundt cake, but anyway, let's talk about sugar.
Did you know that the average American consumes roughly 100 pounds of added sugar a year?
I did know that.
100 pounds. That's the average American.
Pounds
of added sugar. I'm not talking about like sugar you get in
From
fruit
fruit
that's
or...
like you're getting the fiber. I'm just talking about added sugar. You guys, that's
like
a lot. That's like Haley.
I'm a little bit more than 100 pounds, but not a lot.
Yeah,
that's like
it's just wild, and
a lot.
There is sugar in so many things, and I will be the first to say, like, I am a recovering sugar addict,
always and forever.
Yeah, and it is so addictive. And, I mean, there's a reason for that. Like, now that I really understand what is happening in my gut, what is happening in my brain, and then ultimately what is happening throughout my body when I consume sugar, have I completely eradicated sugar from my diet? No. Especially, I eat natural sugar. I love fruit, and I think that there's a lot of benefit to that. You get the fiber, all the things. I still do eat added sugar some too, but I really try to be aware, because we are slowly poisoning our bodies and our brains, and once again, it's one of the leading causes of chronic inflammation in our body, which leads to disease.
Yeah. In my house, when my kids were little, I called it slow poison. I was like, "Oh, you want a cookie? You want slow poison?" My poor kids are probably traumatized, but yeah, it is like. Well, first of all, let's talk about why it's so addictive. So they have done studies. I think we've talked about this in the past on past lives. in our past lives.
In our past lives.
But they have done studies where they take a picture of the human brain without sugar, just like a normal healthy human brain, and then they take another healthy human brain and they give them two different things. They give one human brain cocaine and another human brain sugar. And the same places in the brain light up with those two different substances. Even though one, you would be like, I would never in a bazillion years try cocaine because of what I know it does to my body, right? That's how I feel. And the other one, I'm like, oh, sugar? Oh, it's not so bad. Even though it's lighting up the same places in my brain. It's essentially doing the same thing in my brain as cocaine does, because, and that's why it's so addictive. Your brain is really smart, and it's like, man, I want that dopamine hit. It gives you a little spike of dopamine, which makes you feel good, which it engages like all of these neurons in your brain and serotonin and all these hormones. And then what happens is you're just floating along, you feel so good, and then bam, you hit the brick wall, or you fall off the edge of the cliff, and then you feel like garbage. And that's what sugar does. And then it slowly kills you from the inside.
It does, you guys. And we've talked about this a lot in terms of what happens when you get that glucose spike, and then you actually become more insulin resistant. And then you are leading towards some form of metabolic disorder, pre-diabetes, eventually diabetes. And what's happening from an endocrine system, its effect on our hormones, its effect on our brain, its effect on our sleep, which is also tied to metabolism. Like, it is all tied together. Not to say that we can't enjoy treats from time to time, but if we are making them a part of our day, day in and day out, especially when there are options that we can still enjoy, that we can start to replace with, like, it's wild. Like, it's wild.
I learned something when I was researching this a little bit, and I didn't pinpoint it, that the overconsumption of sugar, which I would say the majority of Americans eating 100 pounds of added sugar every year are doing, it's
that's 17 teaspoons a day.
So you should just measure that out and put it in a bowl and be like,
we should have done that. We should have put it in like 17 teaspoons a day.
That's a lot.
100 pounds a year.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the things that it does, and I didn't know this, it will affect, I knew it affected your brain and cognition, but it like pinpoints a very specific part of your brain, and it is attached to your memory making. And I didn't know that. And so I'm thinking like, well, you don't have a great memory. I don't have a
great memory.
And my memory's okay. I feel like it's a little bit worse now than it used to be. But
I have a good short-term memory, but not a good long-term memory at all.
Maybe it's that sugar addiction.
It could be, but I'm recovering.
Yeah, which is great, because you know what? The good news, just like the good news of eliminating seed oils, if you eliminate, well, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the ways that you can eliminate added sugar, because let's just, so added sugar and seed oils are like this perfect married duo. Yeah. If there are seed oils in a packaged food, most of the time, I'd venture out to say 90-95% of the time, there's also going to be added sugar, because of the way our reward systems in our brains react to those things. So not only are you getting toxic seed oils, but you're also getting added sugar, which those two things together, I can't remember, it's called something. It's like a dual, I don't know, it's bad. It's a double whammy. That's what I'm going to call it. A double whammy on our bodies, on the inside. And it's just like, if we could eliminate that, you guys, and replace it with something else and allow our bodies to heal from the inside out, why wouldn't we do that? Yeah. And the easy way to do that is to eliminate, at least reduce packaged food. Yep. If you look on the label of packaged food, no matter where it's coming from, I love Trader Joe's. I shop almost exclusively at Trader Joe's. But if you look at the packaged food and you read the ingredients, if it says hydrogenated, you can assume it is a hydrogenated oil, because you don't need to hydrogenate olive oil. Nope. But any hydrogenated oil is a seed oil that you don't want to put in your body. And then I read there are over 60 different names for sugar that they put in our food. So whether it is, you know, a chemical derivement of sugar like aspartame or sucralose, or there's 60 different names for sugar. And I think that that's where a lot of people stumble. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't even know. Like, you could read a label and there may be added sugar in it, and we don't know because we don't know all 60 of the names that they have for sugar.
Well, and then oftentimes artificial sugars are actually heightening our sensitivity to sugar because they're so much sweeter than actual sugar themselves, which
Yeah.
is a whole nother discussion. And I will say, I do use some stevia, in my opinion, and this is a whole nother discussion, when it comes to sweetener. Even though I don't think that we should rely on any type of added sweetener, when it comes to sweetener, I feel like it's one of the most natural. It's derived from the stevia plant, and the research is changing on this too, because I just read something that's slightly contradictory to this, but you're not going to get oftentimes that same response from a cellular standpoint that you're going to get from some of the other artificial sugars. So, you know, I think you do your own research, you see what works for you. I put stevia in my coffee in the morning, so I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, you do you.
Yeah,
Like
for
we
sure.
said, we're not here to make friends, and we might lose a few friends, but we just want you guys to have a couple of nuggets that you can like take action on right now. You can go into your house, you can look in your cupboard, and you can pull things out and toss them in the trash if you need to, and replace them with better alternatives.
There was a 15-year study, which is a long time for a study, and I actually dove into the weeds on this study, and then I tried to paraphrase it, and we can share the study if you guys want to read it yourself. But there was a group of people that ate 17 to 21% of their caloric intake were from primarily things like added sugar seed oils. They had a 38% higher risk of dying from a cardiovascular disease. And that
38%? Is that
38% higher risk. And that percentage is actually like a not an uncommon percentage for average Americans' consumption. Now, those that had, and that was compared to those that had 8% of their caloric intake made up of those foods, which, you know, when you look at, and I would like to believe that I'm 8% or less now, I haven't historically been, in terms of having my overall caloric intake made up from things like seed oils and added sugar. I do eat whole fruit as part of my carbohydrates because I think you're getting fiber. I think that there's a lot of nutrients in there. It depends on your goals, all the things. But I just think that being aware and then finding some things that you still enjoy and allowing yourself that piece of birthday cake or whatever it is here or there, but trying not to have there be things in your daily consumption that are added sugar.
Yeah. And when you start doing that, when you start adding sugar into your day, your body's response to it is like, more, please.
Yep.
I want more and more and more. And pretty soon, you're consuming so much added sugar, you may not even realize it. A bite here or a bite there. You guys know I'm completely transparent. I have chocolate every single day. I pre-track it and I make room for it, but every day I allow myself a piece of really dark chocolate, though. It's dark, doesn't have a lot of sugar. But if I have that piece of chocolate early in the day, I just want it all day long.
Yep.
If I wait and I make myself wait until, you know, after lunch or at least in the middle of the day, then I have a shorter amount of time where I have to fight my own self, right? Because and in fact, she has cookies sitting on her counter, and I was like, what are these? Why are these in here?
In a plastic bag that we're supposed to leave my house.
Yeah, because her son is a baker. You guys know that.
And he can make things with almond flour and coconut oil, and, you know, it, like, he doesn't always, but, you know, I do, like, I'll fit things in time to time, but same thing. And there's so much research that shows the actual effect on how you feel in that day when you're consuming sugar, and I can attest to that. It might taste good in the moment, but I mean, sugar oftentimes, and I'm going to tell a little bit of story about that. A little bit of story. I mean, it almost immediately, within the 24-hour period, will lead to insomnia. It will lead to headaches. It will lead to lethargy. It'll lead to nausea. And then over a course of time, there's actually a higher intake of sugar. Their finding is actually also leading, of course, the common ones like higher blood pressure, inflammation, weight gain, diabetes, fatty liver disease, but also they're finding a higher incident of things like depression and anxiety and a lot of what would be considered mood disorders and then sleep disturbance when you have a higher incident of consuming sugar. Now,
my family would say irritability. On Saturday night, Saturday day, we were in Eugene for a football game, and I didn't want to wait in the 5-hour long line to get some real food. So we took jelly beans. There's a note. We're by some windows, and her son is holding a note up to the window for her. So anyway, I ate a bunch of jelly beans, and yesterday was the day after the football game. Man, my kids were like, well, and I knew I had to apologize to my kids because I even told Emmy, I was like, I'm really irritable and super grumpy. And I know, I can pinpoint it to the bag of jelly beans I ate. Now, I'm not saying one bag of jelly beans is going to make you a horrible person. One bag of jelly beans makes me a terrible person. And man, I just get snippy and short and irritable and grumpy.
She says that, but even that version of her is actually super mild.
That's my kids.
Well, and so then I'll give you some real data, I guess I should say. So last night we talked about, we were at this fundraiser. We shared a little bundt cake. Sure, I can fit it in, and it was delicious, and it was worth it to me at the time. So went to sleep last night, still had my good sleep window. I wear this Oura ring, so it tracks all of my sleep data. And I will say, anytime I have more added sugar, even if it fits into my macros, it disturbs my sleep. My resting heart rate never went down last night. My resting heart rate is typically somewhere between 45 and 49 at night. The lowest it got last night was 53. And so it inhibited my body's ability to recover while I slept. I still got good deep sleep, which I'm really thankful for, but my resting heart rate was elevated, and so I'm not getting adequate recovery. And that's just from one evening of having sugar more than I usually do later in the evening. And so that is such a powerful data point for me to be able to measure, because I'm like, okay, was it worth it? Like, it was in the moment, and it was delicious, and I'm going to have things like that time to time. But
that's
sleep.
You got to ask yourself, is the 24-hour you going to be happy with the decisions you make?
Yeah.
So if you're like balancing out this decision, like, should I eat the bundt cake? Should I not?
Yeah.
You should be like, in 24 hours, how am I going to feel about that decision? And oftentimes, and I'm not very good at it, but oftentimes I'll be like, dang it, I should not have had that bag of jelly beans at the football game.
Yeah.
I should have gone and waited in line and gotten some real food, or had a Built Bar in my pocket, or whatever.
Took real food with her.
Well, I had a Built Bar in my pocket. I just didn't want to eat it. It's too much yelling and cheering.
I don't consider a Built Bar real food.
No, but it was better than a bag of jelly beans.
No, I agree. I totally agree. Okay, guys. So far we have talked about the poison that seed oils create in our bodies. The poison that sugar creates in our bodies. Of course, make your own decisions.
Yeah.
Do your own research.
I think this is when we're going to lose some friends.
Yeah.
I think this one.
We've talked about this a fair amount in the past, but never to this degree. And we have this conversation with our clients a lot. And that is alcohol.
Yeah.
And we are not saying that you can never drink alcohol again. Like, once again, like, make your decision if you're going out and you want a drink or two or whatever. But we have a lot of clients that consistently, and I think this is really, in fact, I know this is really common from data, like, that consistently have 1 to 2 drinks several times a week. And there is new research, like, historically, people have considered that, like, mild to moderate drinking. I think everybody understands now that what's considered heavy drinking is not good for your health, right? Even mild to moderate drinking, and we can share these studies that are coming out, there are tremendous effects to your brain, to your long-term brain health, and to your metabolism. And so, can our clients still fit drinks in and have success? Absolutely. Can our clients continue to drink at the level that maybe they started and start with us and change their nutrition and still have success? They can. However, if you are willing to start minimizing to some degree your alcoholic intake, you will reap rewards and have so much more aggressive progress. And that is a hard one for a lot of people, because a lot of people don't necessarily think that it is an addiction and or a stumbling block, but they're very much using it as a relaxing agent, as an inhibition, like social, to remove social inhibition.
Yeah.
And if you're, well, I won't even get into the psychology of that part of it. Let's just talk about what's actually happening in your body.
Yeah, so I feel like I've talked about this before. Maybe I've just talked about it in different scenarios. But so one of the things I didn't know about alcohol until recently is that it is fat.
I'm talking over here.
Okay. Sorry, Facebook reconnected. Anyway, it is fat and water soluble, which means that the alcohol can attach to any cell in your body without regard for what it is. And so a lot of times if something is only fat soluble, then it can't attach to all the cells. It's very specific to where things attach and where they're joined and whatnot. But with alcohol, and that's why if you go into a bar and on an empty stomach and you have a drink, like really within minutes, you can start feeling a little bit tipsy. And that's because the alcohol enters your blood really quickly and can get right into your brain. So we have this thing, I talked about it last week, called the blood-brain barrier. It's like a fence, a protective fence around your brain that keeps all of the bad things out. And the way that it does that is it only allows certain things in that are fat soluble, because our brains are made up of a lot of fat. So since alcohol is water and fat soluble, it can enter into our brains. And in this study that we'll mention probably several times, and we can leave a link to it, what they have found is people who drink mild to moderate. So if you're having, and I can't remember what the exact number it is, and it doesn't matter if you're having like one drink every night for a week, or if you're having like 3 drinks on Friday night or 3 drinks on Saturday. It doesn't matter. It's like the conglomeration of that alcoholic beverage. The amount of grams of alcohol, I think it's like 10 grams.
And they're looking at this like over a week, a collective week.
A collective week. And so what it does is it basically shrinks your brain. It reduces the amount of gray and white matter in our brains. And there are studies that show like exactly how that happens and what's happening in our brains. And that to me was like, whoa, holy cow, that is crazy.
Because it's historically been thought that that's primarily happening with what would be considered more heavy intake.
Yeah.
And so the fact now that they're able to associate that from a clinical research standpoint with mild to moderate intake. Now, once again, like we're talking today really specifically about seed oils, about sugar, and about alcohol. You can fit these things in, you guys. Like, we're not saying you can never have this again in your life. We just really want to educate so that you guys can take that information, do your own research, see what fits with your life, and make informed decisions on if it's worth it to you or not.
Yeah. The kicker for me, because I am a social drinker, I really enjoy having a glass of wine from time to time. I would probably say that I only drink, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 glasses of wine a month, maybe. But I think that what really did it for me was because I really like to try to control my stress. And what I didn't realize is even having 1 glass of wine once a month or twice a month or whatever that is, what that does to your cortisol levels. So alcohol, it attaches and it attacks your adrenal glands. And in your adrenal glands is where our bodies produce hormones like adrenaline, norepinephrine, and cortisol, right? And so what ends up happening in our bodies, and this is what was like, oh man, I need to reevaluate some of my life decisions, was when you drink alcohol, it tells your body to produce more cortisol. Mm-hmm. And so then you're in an elevated state of stress. And that doesn't go down for quite some time. And so then what happens is you drink more alcohol, right? Because you want to relax or you want to have a good time. And then your baseline cortisol level rises. And it keeps doing that. And it doesn't get an opportunity to go down because that takes a fair amount of time. I'm not sure how much time it takes, but it takes some time. But if you're never allowing your cortisol level, your baseline, to get low, then you're constantly living at a high level of stress. And we've talked about what chronic stress does to the body. It creates inflammation, right? Yeah. All of these things do that.
Creating inflammation.
Yeah, which creates disease. And so I didn't know that about cortisol and alcohol and how they were related. And so for me, I'm like, oh man, I really want to control my stress level. I already know that when I have a glass of wine, I sleep like garbage, even though I may get the same amount of sleep. Like my deep sleep and REM sleep really suffers. And I have that data in this ring that I wear, and I'm just like, man, is it worth it to me? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And I think that what is scary for some people who are social drinkers is you go into a social situation where most people are drinking, and you kind of feel funny not drinking. Like even last night, we went to this fundraiser at a vineyard, and I knew I wasn't going to have any wine, even though like everybody around was drinking a glass of wine, which is totally fine. Doesn't bother me. But I was like, when we went up to order, I was like, can I get a sparkling water? I'm not drinking right now. And it's like, well, why do I feel like I even need to like tell people that? Like,
I will just say, you guys, for me, because I don't drink, never have. I mean, I shouldn't say never.
Every once in a
while I have like a couple sips of something, or I did have a Aperol spritz at her cabin once and slept like crap. Yeah. But
But she enjoyed the spritz.
I did. However, I've never had a problem, and maybe it's just because it's just never been something that I've enjoyed or that I've wanted, and I have a ton of fun without it. But I just always say, like, no thanks. Like, I don't ever feel like I need to give an explanation, like, ever. And once again, like, there's no shame if you want to drink here or there. Like, my husband has a drink here or there. Like, so what? Like, that's his choice. But for me, like, I guess I'm just sharing that, and that never once has anybody been like, why are you not drinking? Like, ever.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't know why. I don't know why we feel like, especially in a social situation, if we say no, that people are like, oh man, what's going on with Haley? She's not having a glass of wine tonight.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
Is she pregnant? No.
And once again, it's all about making decisions, right?
Yeah.
And I will say, just to piggyback on the cortisol comment that Haley made, we've talked about this a lot before. In fact, we have an entire live on cortisol. However, cortisol in itself is not a bad thing. We want our cortisol to be its highest in the morning, and then we want it to go down throughout the day. If our cortisol is spiking while we're sleeping, that is oftentimes why people wake up with a racing brain and have a hard time going back to sleep. And I will just say, sleep is such a factor in metabolism. If you are not allowing yourself to get deep, restorative sleep, and you're not working towards better sleep hygiene, then you are doing yourself a disservice with your metabolism. Even if you are nutritionally on point, if your sleep is not and you're not trying to improve it, you are doing yourself a disservice. And we have a free tool on the toolbox of our website, macromavens.life, that is all about deep and restorative sleep, and 99% of the items on there are completely free. They're just tools for you to start trying to put into your life. And so there is that. I just want to read a list, because to me it's really powerful. Like, what alcohol metabolism, when it's turning virtually to poison in your body, like it is turning to a form of poison in your body. It is creating inflammation, like we talked about. It's increasing the stress in your body. And so we talk a lot about the importance of stress resilience. You're having neurodegeneration, which basically is your ability to be cognitively sharp, your actual brain volume, like Haley talked about. Your brain volume is minimizing. So over time, you won't have the same brain capacity, which to me is huge.
It's like super scary. I feel like that's really scary, because I want all my brains.
It affects your gut microbiome, which we've talked about this a lot in the past too, but it is so important that you have a healthy gut, because the gut-brain connection is so powerful. And if you want to feel good, if you want to be energetic, if you want to have hormone harmony, if you want to have a stable mood, if you want to try to minimize anxiety, if you want to try to stay ahead of depressive tendencies, you need to have a happy gut. Like, your gut is so important, and alcohol has a direct negative impact on your gut.
Yeah.
It affects your hormones, your entire endocrine system, and its ability to self-regulate. Like, there are study after study that specifically talks about, especially for men, how oftentimes, and I don't want to get this wrong, I believe for men, what's happening hormonally in a lot of men with alcohol consumption is actually changing androgen, testosterone, to more of an estrogen, and it's making them slightly more estrogen dominant, which is down-regulating their testosterone. I want to read a little bit more about that, so don't quote me on that, but it was really interesting. I was reading this study that had just came out on that. We talked about its effect on your mood, on your motivation, and then of course on your metabolism. And once again, like, choose your poison, as they say, right? Like, fit it in where it's important to you, but just the awareness is in itself, even reducing by 10%. Who knows what that's going to do for you guys? Yeah. And then maybe going beyond that as time goes on and finding things, like, especially when you start feeling good.
Yeah. You know, never mind. What I will say,
I'm like, what do you need to say?
Two more things about alcohol that I just want to touch on before we wrap this up. Is that alcohol, it is an antibacterial agent. And so that's why, like, people, even now, like, if some kid goes out and scratches their knee, you'll throw alcohol on it to clean it. Like, it will kill bacteria. But what it does is it kills all the good bacteria as well as the bad. And oftentimes what happens with people who overconsume alcohol is they'll end up with leaky gut, which means the bad bacteria in our gut, in our intestines, leaks into our bloodstream and causes all kinds of problems. And then the alcohol itself will kill kill all of the good bacteria. And so oftentimes if people are over consuming alcohol and they struggle with like IBS or digestive issues, it's because of what it's doing in our gut. Not even to talk about what alcohol does to our liver, and how important our healthy liver is to our overall health of our body. But the other thing that really surprised me, and this is specific to women, is if you are over consuming alcohol, there are lots of studies about this. You can go out and do your research and look them up. But there's a direct correlation with overconsumption of alcohol and breast cancer, which is really scary. And I don't know what the statistic is. I can't remember the percentage, but it raises your percentage of breast cancer if you consume, I can't remember how many drinks, but it's if you're a regular mild to moderate drinker a week, but it will raise your chances of having breast cancer significantly. And I feel like right now in this day and age, like everything is a risk for increasing our cancer. And so what we need to do is we need
inflammation being the biggest one.
Yes.
You guys.
And so we need to reduce as many things as we can that cause inflammation in our bodies. And so the top three that Emmy and I feel like are really low hanging fruit are, you know, the seed oils, sugar, and alcohol. If you can just be aware, reduce by a little bit, look in your cupboards, eliminate some of the easy things, whether it is starting to cook with olive oil instead of canola oil, if it is replacing sugar with honey, or maybe just eliminating sugar altogether. If you can do that, like I know for me, I needed to do a complete sugar detox in order to like stop my body from craving it. And once you do that, once you detox from sugar, it takes a little while and it's uncomfortable. But then like you stop craving it, and that's really where you want to be. And then if you can eliminate alcohol or at least reduce your intake of alcohol, those three things are huge.
So powerful. Huge.
And I guarantee you will start feeling better.
You will. There's this quote, and I wish it was ours, but it's not, and I don't know who originated it, but it's genes, your genetic makeup or your genes load the gun, but your food choices pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And I just want to like pause and think about that for a minute, because I think that that is such a powerful thing to say, because we might have a particular genetic makeup. I don't particularly have great genes, especially when it comes to cancer. I have BRCA1, which means that I'm predisposed to breast and ovarian cancer, like an 85% chance before the age of 50. I could go on and on. However, just because I have that genetic makeup doesn't mean that I have to allow myself to have cellular degeneration. And one of the biggest things that's going to feed the shifting in my cellular degeneration is going to be chronic inflammation. What's going to feed inflammation in my body are the things that we talked about today. There's going to be things like seed oil. There are going to be things like sugar. There are going to be things like dairy and grains. And then, of course, alcohol. If I can try to utilize foods truly as medicine that fuel my body, that give me appropriate nutrients, and that keep my natural levels of chronic inflammation low. I'm not talking about acute inflammation, but long-term chronic inflammation. I will drastically reduce my opportunity for disease. And oftentimes you can even start to reverse disease that's already taken its root.
Yeah.
So it's so powerful, you guys. And once again, like you can fit whatever you want in, and our clients do. And we work with them strategically. But we would be irresponsible if we had this information and we didn't share it. But do your own homework. And there's a couple podcasts, if you guys are interested, that we've really enjoyed. There's a lot of studies. Like we have the actual studies. We're always happy to share that information, because the more information you have, the more equipped you are, like the healthier you'll likely be, the better choices. You know, and like information is power. Knowledge is power.
Yeah. And we want you guys to be able to, you know, take a couple things and apply them to your life right now, today. So go home, throw away your seed oils, toss the sugar,
Toss it.
pour out the
Toss it.
alcohol,
Yeah.
whatever that means for you. Like I said, we might lose some friends here, but you know what? We
We care.
We just care, and we want you guys to be the best humans you can be. So anyway, that's all for today. If you are interested in being coached by us, real positive chicks, you can head over to macromavens.life, click the hop on board button. It doesn't commit you to anything. It just starts a conversation. If you're curious about any of the stuff that we've talked about, you can feel free to reach out and message us. We would be happy to share all the information with you guys. So
we really appreciate you guys being here. We love questions. If you ever have any, let us know, and we are here for you.
Yep. Have a great week, guys.
Bye.
Bye.